伊朗战争打到第6周，大家都在喊美国又掉进泥潭了，中国这波稳赢。如果你也这么想，那今天这段德媒采访中国专家的视频可能会给你一个新的视角。这位中国专家他给出的结论非常扎实且犀利。中国真正关心的从来不是美国是否在战争中流血，而是这场战火是否正在烧毁中国民族复兴的根基。很多人以为美国乱了，中国就能趁势而起，但专家却警告，一个失控、疯狂且不可预测的美国才是中国复兴路上最大的地雷。与其期待对手自杀，中国更倾向于让对手维持稳定的弱势，从而保障我们自己50年、100年的战略规划。
The Iran war is now approaching its 6th week, and with it, the de facto closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Only about 150 vessels have transited the strait since March 1st, most of them linked to Iran and China. The economic shock resulting from the blockade of the critical energy artery might not have hit China as hard as other countries, especially its Asian neighbors, but the disruption of global trade resulting from the war is sure to impact Beijing's business. So where does that leave China? Beijing is calling for a ceasefire and warning of the risks caused by the war, and it's putting the blame for the disruption squarely on Washington and Israel. Here's the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson speaking on Thursday.
The disruption to navigation through the Strait of Hormuz stems from illegal military actions by the United States and Israel against Iran. Only a ceasefire and restored stability in the Gulf can ensure safe shipping. All parties should work to de-escalate and prevent further damage to the global economy and energy security.
Zhang Yuan Zoe Liu is a senior fellow for China Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Welcome to DW. Let me start with what we're seeing this week. China is calling for a ceasefire, engaging Europe and Gulf states, and coordinating shipping. Is this a more active China or still a fairly cautious one?
I'd say this is a fairly cautious China, and it shows that China is conducting policies and conducting engagement that can systematically manage risk rather than being proactively shaping the outcome of the war in Iran.
How does the Chinese view this war?
I think it's very easy to make the argument that a militarily and strategically distracted America is a good news to China. Hence, Chinese may consider this as a gift to China. But I'd say that's not how Chinese policymakers or Chinese Communist Party view the matter. You know, the idea that every American win must be a China loss and every American loss must be a China win. That's not the angle how Chinese view it. Instead, what they are more concerned about is the overall system upon which China's continued rise of national rejuvenation depends upon. And that system is, for a long period of time, taken for granted, at least by Beijing, that the United States is always going to be there, sustain global demand, and provide stability, or for that matter, the global commons that Chinese export, Chinese technology rely upon. And as the war in Iran, or for that matter, the special operation in Venezuela demonstrated, a peace, stability maintaining America may no longer be there anymore. Instead, China would have to deal with a more erratic, more unpredictable America that may actively undermining the global system upon which China's rise has dependent upon. And that is bad news for Beijing.
Why is disorder so dangerous for China's strategic interests?
It has a lot to do with first of all, the fundamental economic growth model of China. Again, the Chinese economy remains to be a state-led or export-oriented economy, and export constitute about 20% of the Chinese GDP. And more importantly, the whole China self-sufficiency story is not about autarky, but making China indispensable in global supply chain. So long story short, that basically means China's rise for the past 30 years and its continued rise, especially the party's bet on achieving national rejuvenation through self-sufficiency, relies heavily upon a predictable, stable international system. It's not one that is volatile. So from that perspective, when you think about what is necessary, indispensable for an economy that relies upon 5-year planning, it's not a chaos, it's a stability. So this is exactly why, going to Nicole, your first question, what China has been doing now is really trying hard to manage systematic risk.
Yeah, you said that bad news for the U.S. isn't necessarily good news for China, but there must be ways in which China hopes to benefit from the U.S. being distracted here.
I'd say yes. In a way, Chinese policymakers have always wanted a weaker America. They have always wanted a less moral America that can no longer rally American allies around to contain China globally. So from that perspective, since Trump returned to the White House, arguably, it's safe to say America is becoming less moral and more unpredictable. American policies becoming more erratic and more willing to resort to raw military power. But none of this is purely good news for China, in the sense that China would remain counting on the stable global system. And the more America undermines that system, the less China's continued economic rise can benefit from. So this is exactly why, ironically, although China has long advocated for an alternative global system, they have exploited the system that America largely built. Now they might find themselves in the awkward position of defending that exact system.
Looking back at the war in Iran, what's the best case scenario here for China? Of course, also, Iran's most powerful ally.
Yeah, I'd say China is Iran's important partner in the region, and one can even make the case that Iran is China's best friend in the area. But I'd say no, Iran is not our security ally of China. This is not how China views its, through friends or enemies, but instead through vendors and customers. The longer the war, the longer and the more Iran became a strategic liability for China, because yes, China wants oil, but China doesn't want the chaos. China wants to weaken U.S. global influence, but China does not want to shoulder the responsibility in the global system. And more importantly, what Chinese now at this moment really wants is a stabilized strategic framework that can guarantee long-term U.S.-China strategic competition being safeguarded against militarized conflict. So the longer the war drags on, the less likely or the later that U.S.-China stabilization framework that the Chinese wanted could potentially be materialized. Therefore, Iran is not a Chinese ally, although it is a Chinese partner in the region.
Zhang Yuan, Zoe Liu at the Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
视频看完了，大家感受到了吗？ 这位中国专家其实说出了一个非常扎心但也非常真实的现状。第一，利益高于立场。伊朗对中国来说是供应商，是合作伙伴，但绝不是需要共生死的军事盟友。战争拖得越久，伊朗在专家眼里就从战略资产变成了战略负担。第二，秩序高于输赢。中国过去几十年的腾飞是建立在可预测、稳定的全球体系之上的。美国虽然是对手，但如果美国亲手拆掉了他自己建立的这个体系，中国这艘复兴的大船也将面临前所未有的惊涛骇浪。这种清醒到骨子里的战略思维，可能没有美国必败听起来爽，但它解释了为什么中国一直在呼吁停火。这不仅是道义，更是最硬的利益。看完专家的分析，你觉得这种只谈复兴不谈恩怨的逻辑是真正的大国智慧，还是我们不得不面对的现实？评论区告诉我你的看法，我们下期再拨开地缘政治的真相。